Hello, everybody. On today's edition of the Michael Costa Show, I want to explain to you why I'm a super anti-racist, what that means, and why they are telling you, or how they are telling you, that your 3-month-old is already a racist. Seems crazy, doesn't it? Well, that's what they're starting to push. Well, they've been pushing already for a while, but it's starting to become mainstream. And it's very dangerous. Because when we start separating, that's basically why I'm a super anti-racist. Because I'm the opposite of what Dr. Abraham Kendi is pushing as an anti-racist. Because I believe it's dangerous that we start classifying everybody by the color of their skin and starting introducing in K-12 schools, in elementary schools, telling students to basically separate themselves by race, and why if they're white they're privileged, and why if they're black they're oppressed. I think that 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds shouldn't be exposed to this kind of racial division. And what do you think the outcome of this will be? Will be more racial division. When kids will grow up being classified in these boxes by the color of their skin, what do you think that brings? That brings more division. Because the blacks will think from a very young age, that white people are the enemies, and white kids from a very young age will be taught that they're the oppressors. So there's only one outcome in all this, is more racial division. And like I've shown you in my previous show, that this is why these people are useful idiots for the white supremacists and the real racists, because their goals are basically the same. It's racial segregation. So this is not progressive, this is regressive. We're going back in time to the Jim Crow era of racial segregation. Everything where you see racism or race everywhere you go, and that everything must be divided by race. Well, I'm a super anti-racist because I believe in the principle of colorblindness. I believe and I judge people on their character, not on the color of their skin. And that's what I will teach my kids. That we're all equals and to treat everybody as such. And I believe that's an important principle to show your kids. Not that everything is divided by race. Okay, so let me show you. First, this is one of the most important reasons why I'm a super anti-racist. Because when you see racism everywhere, like in this case of the National Education Association, this document is titled "The Racist Beginnings of Standardized Testing." This story offers insight from grade school to college on how students of color have suffered from the effects of biased testing. So basically what they're saying here, the National Education Association, it's not no marginalized non-governmental organization. This is the National Education Association. Basically saying that black people are too stupid. This is what they're saying, not what I'm saying. I believe completely the opposite. That black people can thrive in for whatever testing or standardized testing that you put in front of them. Well, they believe that black people are too stupid to pass these standardized tests. Sounds pretty racist to me, doesn't it? Or even here, The Smithsonian Museum apologizes for saying hard work, rational thought is white culture. A Smithsonian museum apologized for a chart listing hard work and rational thought as traits of white culture. Basically, the Smithsonian here was saying that black people can't work hard or can't have rational thought. But it gets crazier. The National Museum of African American History and Culture said in a statement Friday that it was wrong to include the graphic in an online portal about race and racism in America. It is important for us as a country to talk about race. We thank those who shared concerns about our Talking About Race online portal. We need these types of frank and respectful interchanges as we as a country grapple with how we talk about race and its impact on our lives. The statement said, We erred in including the chart. We have removed it and we apologize. So they say the error was just in including the chart, not in what the chart stated. The educational resource released by the Washington, D.C. Museum is intended to serve as a guideline for discussing race. It includes a section about whiteness. A chart included in the section titled Aspects and Assumptions of Whiteness in the United States included the cultural traits, which included hard work is the key to success and objective, rational, linear thinking, Newsweek reported. The National Museum of African, in this tweet by Brian York, the National Museum of African American History and Culture wants to make you aware of certain signs of whiteness: individualism, hard work, objectivity, the nuclear family, progress, respect for authority, delayed gratification, more. Sorry about that. The national, so here it says, I will show you. So, aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States: rugged individualism, family structure, emphasis on scientific method, history, Protestant work ethic, the hard work I was telling you about, religion, status, power, and authority, future orientation, plan for future, delayed gratification, progress is always best, tomorrow will be better. These are all parts, they say, the Smithsonian says, is part of white culture. Time, follow rigid time schedules, time viewed as a commodity. So basically they're saying that black people can be punctual. Aesthetics, based on European culture, steak and potatoes, bland is best, woman's beauty based on blonde, thin, Barbie, man's attractiveness based on economic status, power, intellect, holidays based on Christian religions, based on white history, and male leaders, justice based on English common law, protect property and entitlements, intent counts. To be competitive is part of white culture. Like black people can be competitive. So you see the racism that is running rampant, in public institutions. White dominant culture or whiteness refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and are not considered standard practices in the United States, the graphic says. And since we white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. According to the chart, those aspects included self-reliance, a nuclear family where the husband is the breadwinner and the wife is the homemaker, no tolerance for deviation from single God concept, respecting authority, planning for the future, and bland is best in aesthetics. The museum said it is reviewing policies to ensure quality of digital materials. The museum's apology comes at a time when people across the United States are calling for better race relations in the wake of the death of George Floyd, a black man who died in police custody on Memorial Day. His death has sparked protests nationwide. So here, I showed you how the Smithsonian, what the Smithsonian views as white culture, and what they think black people are not capable of, like be punctual or work hard or strive to success. That's blatantly racist. And most of these people that write these documents are white people. They're the real racists. Where they think the white people are superior and therefore only them can be the saviors for black people. And that's racist. Here I'll show you another document from a unconscious, well, let me say it again. Hypersensitive racial training at T-Mobile. Okay, so it's a white privilege checklist. So it's basically telling you to see this and check off, if you're white, all these things in the list. So white privilege checklist. Peggy McIntosh, Associate Director of the Wesley College Center for Research on Women, describes white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets, which I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. So Peggy McIntosh is, by her writing here, I assume she is white. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks, she wrote in 1989. The following are examples of ways white individuals have privilege because they are white. Please read the list and place a check next to the privilege that applied to you or that you have encountered. At the end, try to list at least 2 more ways you have privilege based on your race. I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. BS. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented into a supermarket. Go into a supermarket and find the food that I grew up with. Into a hairdresser shop and I find someone who can deal with my hair. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial responsibility. I am not made acutely aware that my shape, bearing, or body odor will be taken as a reflection on my race. I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. I can take a job or enroll in a college with an affirmative action policy without having my coworker or peers assume I got it because of my race. Well, they're the ones who put these affirmative action policies, which only hurt people of color. I can be late to a meeting without having the lateness reflect on my race. Like I just said, it's like black people can't be on time. It's just saying it is racist. I can choose public accommodations without fearing that people of my race cannot get in or will be mistreated. I am never asked to speak for all of the people of my racial group. I can be pretty sure that I ask to talk with the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been signaled out because of my race. I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children magazines featuring people of my race. I can choose blemish cover or bandages in flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I can walk into a classroom and know I will not be the only member of my race. I can enroll in a class of college and be sure that the majority of professors will be of my race. So this is what they're teaching, or what they're training that they are performing in corporations. In this case, T-Mobile. Now let me show you why your 3-month-old is racist. So in this Washington Examiner article by Michael Lee, titled Arizona Education Department Encourages Talking to Babies About Racism, says 3-month-olds can be racists. Report. The Arizona Department of Education has purposely created an equity toolkit that teaches parents how children as young as 3 months can develop racial bias and encourages parents and teachers to talk to young children about race. Scoop, the Arizona Department of Education has created an equity toolkit claiming that babies show the first signs of racism at 3 months old, and that white children remain strongly biased in favor of whiteness by age 5. Writer Christopher F. Rufo reported on Twitter. An infographic included with the tweet shows how children's racial attitudes evolve from birth to age 6, with newborn babies showing no racial preferences but starting to develop one as early as 3 months old. At birth, babies look equally at faces of all races. At 3 months, babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers, the graphic says. By 30 months, children are using race to choose playmates. And by ages 4 to 5, children's expression of racial prejudice peak. But while black and Hispanic children start to lose their inherent racism, white children are apparently prone to carry racial biases further into adolescence. By 5, black and Latinx children in research settings show no preference toward their own groups compared to whites. White children at this age remain strongly biased in favor of whiteness. Another recommended reading teaches white parents how to talk to their kids about race. White parents can and should begin addressing issues of race and racism early, even before their children can speak. The lesson reads, avoiding the topic rather than actively countering it with anti-racist attitudes and actions simply opens the door for children to absorb bias from the world around them. One resource titled What White Children Need to Know About Race argues against neutral and colorblind approaches to race, saying such approaches are a tool of whiteness. So these documents argue against the fact of teaching your kids about being neutral towards other people of race, of a different race, or colorblind, which is basically judging people by their character and not by the color of their skin, which is what we should all adhere to. Race, judging people on race shouldn't exist. You are a human just the way I am a human. We both have equal opportunities. Yes, we don't all have equal outcomes, but individual factors are the cause of that, not the color of someone's skin. While students may need to be reassured that they did not ask to be white, they should also know that the reality in which they are embedded ascribes unearned privileges to their whiteness. The resource notes, it is those seeing themselves in a larger radicalized context that white people can begin to understand how they work to change racism and change what it means to be white. Other resources warn that one can still be racist even if the person has a black friend, partner, or child. These people obviously don't know what the definition of racism, of being a racist, is. I have two definitions of racism. One is discrimination based on your skin color. We could say 3. 2 is judging someone based on their skin color. And 3 which is the purest form of racism, is thinking you are superior because of your skin color to other people of different skin colors. Now, if anybody thinks racism has a different definition, please let me know in the comments. The resources says that white people throw in terms such as the race card, black on black crime, reverse racism, and colorblindness as a way to alleviate some of their white fragility. These are made up terms that white people use to feel better about themselves, the resource says. While the resource says it is a good thing for white people to have had children, partners, and friends of color, it warns that those relationships do not give you a one-way ticket out of racism town. Unless we, as white people, are listening, learning, and changing based on what we're being taught within these relationships, we aren't doing any good at all. The resource continues. In fact, we're doing more harm than good. Clapping back when being called out only proves that white people cannot stand not to be at the center of every single conversation, policy, and action. Obviously, the Arizona Department of Education did not immediately respond to the Washington Examiner's request for comment. So this is what the Arizona Department of Education, and I'm sure it's happening in other departments of education, and I'm sure it's happening here in Canada too. Actually, I know it is. So we've seen evidence of these types of documents being circled in our education system. Now, let me read you this op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal by a parent in the New York City school system, and why he's taking out his kids of the school system. And before you say anything, no, he is not a white parent. So dividing in the Wall Street Journal, dividing by race comes to grade school. My awakening to the new orthodoxy began during the past summer of discontent. In mid-June, a few weeks after the George Floyd protests began, the head of Riverdale Country School, the New York City private school my wife and I entrusted with the education of our two young children, sent a memo apologizing for unspecified past wrongs. We have the responsibility to use our privilege to fight for change, he explained. We are also free to shift some aspects of our culture more quickly than other institutions and organizations. In September, at the first assembly of the year, instead of reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and singing America the Beautiful, long-standing school traditions, the head of the lower school announced that the theme for the year would be allyship. He then played a video in which the school mascot told students, ages 5 through 11, to check each other's words and actions. The lower school head had earlier written that it is essential that parents, caregivers, and educators acknowledge racial differences as opposed to a colorblind stance, and offered reading recommendations such as Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, a white racist that blatantly she says that she's a racist. And these are the books that they're giving parents and caregivers of kids 5 to 11 to read at home. Families at Riverdale are encouraged to join school-sponsored affinity groups to bond with people from their ethnicity or skin color. One is called simply the POC, short for Parents of Color. So they're encouraging parents to be solidary with parents from their ethnic groups or race. They're advocating for segregation. At this point in the story, perhaps, lived experiences become relevant. I am half Mexican and Yaqui, an indigenous tribe native to the U.S.-Mexico border region, and half Jewish. I spent the first year of my life on a commune in Berkeley, California. Growing up, I was aware that I had darker skin than my mother and my classmates, but I was never taught to define my identity by the color of my skin. My mixed background and ancestry made me feel like nothing more than a typical American. And that's the way people should think. Now, You don't want to think like that. It's your problem. Live and let live, right? But when it comes to race, this should be the principle that we all have. Like, it doesn't matter what skin color I am. It matters what I do and how hard I work to achieve success or realize my dreams. My wife came to the US as a refugee from the former Soviet Union. She spent the first 5 years of her life in an intolerant society. Whether her group identity as a Jew was stamped in her passport, in school, she was taught to keep the tabs on friends and family. And after one particularly effective lesson, she was inspired to turn in her own father to the local police for crimes against the state. Fortunately, no harm came of it. But suffice it to say, we are both allergic to forced conformity, especially when young. Impressionable children are trained to obsess over racial differences and be on the lookout for deviations from our orthodoxy. So basically it goes on to say that they asked questions and they didn't get the answers that they wanted, and that the school was going to continue pushing these racial divisions. So they took the kids out of school. He says, I advocate genuine anti-racism, which I call super anti-racism, which is what I am, a super anti-racist. Rooted in dignity and humanity, but the ideology underlying the racial literacy guide distributed by the school wasn't like that. He says he believes in the strong connection with Martin Luther King's dream of an America where people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we should all feel a connection to that statement. Because like Frederick Douglass before him, in the late 1800s, and Martin Luther King, believed strongly in the Constitution. They just thought at that point, and they were right, that the Constitution, the protections that the Constitution provides should apply to all. And they were right. And eventually laws came into effect, the Civil Rights Law, and that became the case. And that's why he advocated that he wanted, his dream was that his kids will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And now, these critical race theorists, who are not progressives, they are regressives, are going back to the Jim Crow era, where race is everywhere and everything must be divided by race. Let me show you a paragraph from a literal critical race theory textbook in university. Crits, which is short for critical race theorists, are also highly suspicious of another liberal mainstay, namely rights. Particularly, some of the older, more radical CRT scholars with roots in racial realism and an economic view of history believe that moral and legal rights are apt to do the right holder much less good than many would like to think. Rights are almost always procedural, for example, to a fair process, rather than substantive, for example, to food, housing, or education. Think how our system applauds affording everyone equality of opportunity, but resists programs that assure equality of results. That is just plain stupid. You will never have equality of results, because that's based on the individual's how can I say this? It's based on the individual's will to succeed. If that individual doesn't have the will to succeed or doesn't care, then obviously he won't have the same results as somebody that's working hard or trying, regardless of race. I know many white people that have no ambition, no will to succeed. They will never have the same results that someone, or even a black person that has will to succeed, will end up getting. It's just stupid. Everybody should have equal opportunity to succeed, not equal results. It just doesn't make sense. Moreover, rights are almost always cut back when they conflict with the interests of the powerful. For example, hate speech, which targets mainly minorities, gays, lesbians, and other outsiders, is almost always tolerated, while speech, that's bullshit, while speech that offends the interests of empowered groupthink, a ready exception in the First Amendment law. Think, for example, of speech that insults a judge or other authority figure, that defames a wealthy and well-regarded person, that disseminates a government secret, or deceptively advertises products, thus cheating a large class of middle-income consumers. So this is basically taken out from a critical race theory textbook in university. They're basically telling you that they want to take away rights from people based on the color of their skin. That is racist. And how they see race everywhere. For example, in this example taken from an article, in the 2007 book, Should We Burn Babar?, the author and educator Herbert R. Cole contended that the Babar the Elephant books were celebrations of colonialism because of how the title character leaves the jungle and later returns to civilize his fellow animals. One of the books, Babar's Travels, was removed from the shelves of a British library in 2012 because of its alleged stereotypes of Africans. Critics also have faulted the Curious George books for their premise of a white man bringing home a monkey from Africa. And Laura Ingalls Wilder's portrayals of Native Americans in her Little House on the Prairie novels have been faulted so often that the American Library Association removed her name in 2018 from a Lifetime Achievement Award it gives out each year. Folks, these people are so crazy that they see race and racism everywhere. We're going back to the age of book burning. Just like they did with the 6 Dr. Seuss books that are no longer going to be published. And now we're seeing libraries here in Canada and in the United States removing all Dr. Seuss books. So, we are going into an age of fascism. They say they are anti-fascists. Well, that's BS, because they are the fascists. They're communist fascists or communist authoritarians or tyrannical communists, whichever label you want to give them. Now let me show you how they see race everywhere and how we're going back to the segregation period. Well, now you have in groceries products being labeled by who owns these companies. Black owned, Hispanic owned. Now we have sections in groceries where we have black owned products, Hispanic owned products. So what do you think the outcome of this, of seeing race everywhere? You're going to solidify with your race, because the human race will always try to survive. So when you're backed into a corner, most people fight back. So these anti-racists are creating more racism and racists. Here, in a graduation from Columbia University, Ivy League University, will have their graduation ceremonies separated by race. Native graduation, lavender graduation. I don't know, somebody's going to have to tell me what the lavender graduation is. Asian graduation. Lavender is LGBTQIA plus community. Okay. Asian graduation. FLI graduation, first generation and or low income community. Latinx graduation, black graduation. Folks, under the premise of safe spaces, where these racists are bringing us back to segregation, where everything is separated by the color of your skin. So you have to have a Native American graduation, a lavender graduation, an Asian graduation, a low-income graduation, a Latinx graduation, and a black graduation. Because these people can just have a graduation altogether. I don't see how people don't see that this leads to more racism. But I will try to end this on a good note with a professor that came here from communist Romania. Okay, I'll get into his intro or his bio. There is no such thing as white math. I naively believed that STEM would be sparred from the ideological takeover. I was wrong, says Princeton professor Sergio Kleinerman. This is Barry Weiss, because this was published on Barry Weiss's Substack, so she's kind of gives an introduction to the article. I am not at all qualified to introduce today's guest writer, Sergio Kleinerman. I barely eked out a C+ in high school calculus. While Sergio is a professor of mathematics at Princeton, who specializes in the mathematical theory of black holes, he's been a MacArthur Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellow, and is a member of the National Academy of Sciences. Mathematics allowed a young Sergio, who came from age in communist Romania, to escape to a world where right and wrong couldn't be fudged, and ultimately to a life of freedom in the United States. Without math, his life quite literally would not have been possible. In the piece below, he explains how activists are destroying his discipline in the name of progress. Worse, they are robbing poor children of the opportunity to raise themselves up by mastering it, with unfold effects on all of us. Math, with its seemingly unbiased tools, 2 + 2 is always equals 4, has presented a problem for an ideological moment that sees any inequality of outcome as evidence of systemic bias. The problem cannot be that some kids are better at math or that some teachers are better at teaching it. Like so much else, the basic woke argument against math is that it is inherently racist and needs to be made anti-racist. That is accomplished by undermining the notion of right and wrong answers, by getting rid of the expectation that students show their work by referring to mathematical testing tools as racist, and by doing away with accelerated math classes. If that sounds like a caricature, I urge you to read this whole document, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. This is the one I talked to you about in previous videos, where they show you why math is racist, is based in white supremacy, which Sergio writes about below. As the linguist John McWhorter put in a powerful piece published yesterday, to distrust this document is not to be against social justice, but against racism. And he's right. Sergio wrote me in an email that the situation in his field reminds him of his line from Thomas Sowell. Ours may become the first civilization destroyed, not by the power of enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. In an age of artificial intelligence, they are creating artificial stupidity. So let me start reading his article. In my position as a professor of mathematics at Princeton, I have witnessed the decline of universities and cultural institutions as they have embraced political ideology at the expense of rigorous scholarship. Until recently, this past summer, really, I had naively thought that the STEM disciplines would be spared from this ideological takeover. I was wrong. Attempts to deconstruct mathematics, deny its objectivity, accuse it of racial bias, and infuse it with political ideology have become more and more common, perhaps even at your child's elementary school. This phenomenon is part of what has been dubbed the Great Awakening. As others have explained powerfully, The ideology incubated in academia, where it indoctrinated plenty of bright minds, it then migrated through those true believers into our important cultural, religious, and political institutions. Now it's affecting some of the country's most prominent businesses. Unlike the traditional totalitarianism practiced by former communist countries like the Romania I grew up in, this version is soft. It enforces its ideology not by jailing dissenters or physically eliminating them, but by social shaming, mob punishment, guilt by association, and coerced speech. When it comes to education, I believe the woke ideology is even more harmful than old-fashioned communism. You want to continue, if you want to read the whole article, you can go on Barry Weiss, BARIWEISS.substack.com and /P/ there is no such thing as white math. Or just Google there's no such thing as white math, Barry Weiss, you'll find it on Google. But it's very, at least we're starting to see people, even on the left, waking up to the dangers of this woke culture, critical race theory, or critical theory in general, which includes gender studies, fat studies. Because like they CDC came out with a study last week saying that the majority of people dying and getting sick from COVID are people that are obese. Yet in fat studies, they teach that being fat is healthy. I have no problem with people being comfortable in their bodies. But the fact to promote to children that being obese is not a health hazard, it's just plain stupid. So that's why I'm a super anti-racist. Because I believe in not judging people by the color of their skin and not separating everything by race. We are all one race, the human race. Another reason I am a super anti-racist is because I will fight the idea of teaching kids that are 3 months old, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, that they must see color in everything. I refuse to do it, and I will fight against it. And I hope you do too. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you soon.